What was the Ark of the Covenant? It was a piece of furniture in the Jewish Tabernacle. The Tabernacle was a movable temple where God's presence dwelled while Israel wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. It was then set up in Shiloh under Joshua's leadership after the death of Moses. The tabernacle had 4 distinct coverings made of sealskins, ram skins dyed red, goat hair, and white linen. The tabernacle was divided into 2 compartments called the Holy and the Most Holy. The Most Holy contained only the Ark of the Covenant, a wooden box overlaid with gold. Inside were the 2 tables of the law that God gave Moses, a golden pot filled with manna that never spoiled, and Aaron's rod that budded. The golden lid was called the mercy seat, with 2 angels, one at each end, their wings outstretched and touching. Between the angels was a supernatural bright light, indicating God's presence. According to Old Testament law, before being moved, the priests carefully covered it so that no one could see it. It was to be hand-carried only by certain Levites, using 2 wooden poles put through rings on the sides to ensure that they didn't directly touch it. Many years later, the Israelites were at war with the Philistines. Thinking it would bring them victory, they brought the ark into battle, but God had not commanded this. The Philistines won and captured the ark. Israel's most important sacred treasure, a physical representation of God's presence and power, was now in the enemy's hands. The Philistines put it next to the idol of one of their false gods named Dagon. But the next morning, they discovered Dagon had fallen on his face in front of the ark. They set up the idol again, but the same thing happened the next morning. But this time, Dagon's head and hands were broken off and lying in the doorway. The ark brought them more trouble. The people were plagued with tumors and mice. So they put it on a cart and returned it to Israel, to the town of Beth Shemesh. The people saw the returning ark and rejoiced. But some men disobediently looked inside the ark, and at least 70 died as a result. The ark was then brought to the hillside home of Abinadab, whose son, Eleazar, took care of it for 20 years, far away from the people. King David wanted to bring the ark to the center of Jerusalem to bring the people of Israel back to a heartfelt worship of God. They joyfully brought the ark out of the house on a cart, with Abinadab's other 2 sons, Uzzah and Ahio, guiding it. David and all the people of Israel celebrated the return of God's presence with singing and musical instruments. However, no one had studied how to properly move it. Yes, the Philistines had transported the ark on a cart too, but they were not expected to know or follow God's laws. Remember, it was to be hand-carried only by certain Levites using poles inserted into rings on the ark to prevent directly touching it. Israel, and especially David, should have known that transporting the ark this way was specifically against God's command. Uzzah and Ahio had lived with the ark in their home for years, knowing they were not to touch this holy thing. The oxen stumbled, and Uzzah put his hand on the ark to steady it, and was immediately struck dead. David was angry and confused. He took the ark to the house of Obed-Edom, a Levite family. The ark stayed there for 3 months, and the Lord blessed Obed's household. Now David carefully studied the correct procedures before moving the ark to Jerusalem. It was carried properly as God had commanded, and placed in a special tent David had constructed for it. The proper worship of God had come back to Israel at last. Studying the ark's history provides many lessons for us about God and holiness. For example, it's not enough for us to know about what God wants us to do. We have to actually do it. He values obedience. We must respect anything having to do with God. We are to appreciate God's blessings by using all that He has provided, like spending our time, energy, and efforts wisely, whatever it takes to serve Him. So, what was the Ark of the Covenant? A piece of furniture in the most holy of the tabernacle. The Ark was a physical representation of God's presence and power for the Israelites in the Old Testament. Thank you for liking and subscribing.